Hello, welcome to a new video. So today's video, I'm just going to be exploring what a child-centered society is and kind of just answering what one is and what it means. Even though technically we've kind of become one more, I kind of just want to explore why we still aren't fully a child-centered society. So, quick exercise. When I say the phrase child-centered society, what pops into your head first? What do you picture and what words do you think of? This isn't a trick question, by the way. I'm just legit asking because I want you to kind of just think first what you are imagining and just kind of sit with it for a second. Feel free to drop it in the comments down below and just share what you think first. Also, when you do hear the phrase child-centered society, does it bring any emotions out, any feelings? What are you thinking? So I think one of the first things that people tend to jump on when they hear child-centered society are negative labels. So things like spoiling children, coddling children, and letting them run wild. But that reaction in itself just goes to show how unchild-centered society really is. Because by centering children, it isn't about indulgence, it's about fairness, respect, and also building a better and healthier future for everyone. So a child-centered society is one that prioritizes the needs, rights, and well-being of children by placing them at the focus of decision-making in families, communities, and policies. This approach emphasises empowering children to express their views and be active participants in matters affecting their lives, fostering an environment where their development and potential are nurtured and supported. So does that mean I'm saying that we are not a child-centred society in England, or at least in the Western parts of the world? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm basically just saying that we are not fully child-centred. We've implemented and adopted a lot that does make us more child-centred, but we could do better. I think it's good to start with adult-centeredness and child-centeredness in family dynamics, because I think this is the one thing a lot of people will be able to kind of understand it a little bit better in a smaller context, and it kind of will show how we have shifted, or we are shifting, or hope so anyway, away from traditional parenting and what that looks like in family dynamics, and why being child-centered in a family unit is extremely important for the health of the family. So going off Britain anyway, and I'm going to say most of the Western world, we are very adult-centric in families, very adult-centric. So most parenting is adult-centric. Traditional parenting, the old school approach, is very adult-centric, and it's still there today. So let me just kind of explain what that means and what it looks like in a family dynamic, because it's so important to understand this happening in a family dynamic, because the child-centered approach does shift away from it, and it does contribute a lot to the health of families. So in an adult-centric family, adults make the rules for their own comfort, children are expected to obey without question, kids are punished instead of understood, play and rest are treated as luxuries and not needs, and emotions are often ignored, mocked, or silenced. So I'm sure most of us can kind of apply that to either our own personal lives, or just understanding that on a whole, most adults or parents do treat their children like that. So now if we look at a child-centered approach, it does completely flip this. So that means listening to children's voices, involving them in family decisions, respecting their bodily autonomy and consent, seeing play, rest, and curiosity as essential, responding to behaviour with guidance and not punishment, and treating children as valued members of the household and not second-class citizens. So I'll let you brew a little bit on those differences, because I know lots of people will probably look at the child-centered approach and be like, what the flip? I would argue that the first former approach, which is the adult-centric approach, is the mainstream, more traditional way of parenting, and obviously the child-centered approach is more of a modern way to parent. That's not to say it was never kind of done back in the day, but it has become a little bit more understood nowadays, and I think it's just purely mostly down to more research and just more respect for children. So to put it short, the old approach is basically the whole because I said so and I know what's best mentality, with adults making decisions for children without their input, and the child-centered approach moves away from that model by valuing children's perspectives and engaging with them directly. When a family is child-centred, it's not about a child running the home. It's about fairness and where everyone's needs matters. And the child's perspective is respected and not dismissed. And I would argue that this balance is vital for equality in the home, and it mirrors exactly what we're missing and need in society. So, in a child-centred society, outside of the family home. Now, some of this does still trickle into a family home as well. And I would argue, especially with things like the school system, it has heavily influenced and really changed how we view children and how we treat them as well. Anyway, these are some things that I've written down for a child-centred society. So let's start with the first one. Play is seen as a right and not a privilege, and you would not call it a reward or anything like that. You wouldn't take it away as punishment. You wouldn't use it as a means to weaponize it for something and to coerce children into doing things. It's literally an essential need for children. So when we make it out to be a privilege or something that gets rewarded to children or taken away for a punishment, it's very, very, I don't know, it's crossing a line there, because play is essential for children's development in so many different ways, and that does include academically. Schools adapt to children's needs instead of forcing every child into the same mould. Well-being is prioritised, especially over rigid attendance or test scores in schools. Cities are designed with safe, child-friendly spaces. At least add more. And also, I don't know anywhere else in the world, but I do know in England, a lot of play areas are very run down and are just not looked after very well. And also, children's voices are heard in policies that affect their lives. So that means you actually value them as active participants and active members in society, and don't just see them as future citizens. So that's a very interesting one, and I would say it's quite important because, yeah, we're making so many decisions, and obviously I get it. You've got to take children's perspectives with a pinch of salt, but does that mean we just completely ignore what children are saying or how they're responding to their environments with their behaviour? Because a lot of kids' behaviour is literally feedback. And I think that's just something that adults get so wrong, and then we just start labelling them and we just start telling them that they're wrong and disrespectful. And I'm just like, surely that child is just basically showing us that we need to change something. That's how I see it anyway, but I digress. Now let's look at what a child-centred society would not include, because this is just as important. A child-centred society would never defend corporal punishment, and we wouldn't have adults believing it's some sort of inherent right that they have as a parent in order to use it as punishment and discipline. And we also wouldn't have adults also believing it's some biological need that is a necessary thing to be doing in a child's development. Like, some people generally just advocate for it and defend it like it's no tomorrow, and I'm kind of like, that's a little bit creepy anyway. Like, why even, like, why? Instead, adults would actually be way more educated in child development, so they could better understand behaviour in context and have the right tools in order to parent and raise a human being. Parents would not be judged for wanting to spend more time with their children, whether that's choosing to stay at home longer with their infants or simply deciding to not send their children to school. Society wouldn't label this as overprotective or coddling. It would recognise it as a valid, nurturing choice that strengthens families. Because when we stop normalising harm and start valuing connection, children thrive. And when children thrive, adults and society thrive too. So now let's get into why child-centredness matters for everyone. Because I know most people are probably like, well, we're talking so much about children, what about the adults? Let's try and recenter the adults and what that means for them. But yes, don't worry, it does affect everybody as a whole, but in a good way. So yes, it doesn't just benefit children, and I like to think that's kind of a given. You know, water is wet type thing, because if you really think about it, when children are respected, when they are valued, when they are included in things and are heard properly and involved properly, they grow into adults. So that is one reason why it affects everybody, but in a good way. When children are better supported and nurtured and respected, then they grow into adults who are a lot more healthier. There's no one size fits all in childhood, just like there isn't one in adulthood. And a child-centered society recognises that and designs systems that helps everyone thrive. So, if at the start of the video you first initially imagined a child-centred society as something negative, if you called the approach something like spoiling, coddling, anything negative, I want to touch upon this because it only reveals our bias, and I think it's a really important conversation to have. So, for example, when adults want better respect in the workplace, we don't call them spoiled. And when they're fighting for their well-being, we call that progress. But when children ask for the same respect, or an adult like myself says children deserve better respect, we call it chaotic, we call it disrespectful, we call it spoiling, indulgence, coddling. That double standard is proof we are not child-centred or nearly as much child-centred as we think we are. A child-centred society really drives home the respect, the dignity and the opportunities that they deserve, because children are people too. If we build a child-centred society, we all win. And if anything, we all get to inherit a world shaped by compassion and fairness. So maybe we need to be asking ourselves, especially as adults, what would change if we put children at the centre instead of on the sidelines? So I do hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and also drop a comment down below. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any more content like this from me.